Welcome to the weekly news around Bali and Asia. My name is Bruce Pullman, and I'm going to be talking about the news every week. These are short newscasts about topics of interest to those of us that live or visit Bali or Asia. I'll be covering all of Asia and maybe a little bit in Melanesia, another of my interest. And I'm an anthropologist. This newscast is coming to you from the Peripatetic Anthropologist YouTube channel. Welcome to the weekly news around Bali and Asia. I'm Bruce Pullman, and this is the news from the week preceding May 16th, 2020. And today, I'm going to be specializing on the COVID-19 in Asia. Predominantly Indonesia, but also a few other countries. And so, first I'm going to discuss some of the issues of COVID-19 in Indonesia, and just a bit about Bali, and then going to go on to Vietnam and talk about going back to school and some of the other countries in Asia too in their online schooling initiatives, and then take a look at the spike in Korea, South Korea, and then finally end up with Singapore, which has been having a tough time lately. And so let's get started with the numbers first. The numbers for today: Indonesia, 16,496 cases, 1,076 deaths, 3,803 recovered patients, and we're up at 654 tests per million. 654. Now remember that it wasn't that long ago we were at 22, so there's been some big jumps. Still, we're 160th in the world in terms of our rate of testing. So we've got a long way to go still. And I'm going to be mentioning that in just a minute. Let's start with Indonesia is making COVID-19 testing kits on their own. We've gotten testing kits from China, we've gotten testing kits from South Korea. We've had problems with testing kits that I talked about in the COVID-19 Bali updates, where we had a whole village tested positive and then came back, tested negative. And so Indonesia is making their own. A consortium of Indonesian research agencies and companies are mass producing COVID-19 testing kits, and they expect to be able to make 50,000 a month by the end of this month. And some of the consortium includes Technology Asset and Application Agency, Erlangga University, Gajah Mada University, and the state-run medical equipment manufacturer Hepatica. And so this is a consortium that's making these kits, and this is definitely something that we need. We need to be able to rely on our own technology, not just hope to wait for other people to give us testing kits. And so that is good news. The country will be able to begin carrying out massive testing, which needs to be done, and especially is going to need to be done after the end of Ramadan and whatever is going to happen with Mudik, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so good news on the testing kit front. And next, Pak Jokowi has called for flattening the curve by any means necessary. And so he said that he wants to have moderate rate of cases, new cases, by June, and a low rate by July. He said this in a cabinet meeting this past week, And he said everyone needs to cooperate, not just the COVID-19 task force, and this includes all government officials, non-government organizations, volunteers, political parties, and the people. And at the time that this happened, the head of the task force, COVID-19 task force, said, well, it looks like we're plateauing and we're starting to decrease, and then the next day that case was shot up again. So we're nowhere near plateauing at this point. Our cases do continue to go up, and as I said, we're going to have Mudik. Another 7 days is the end of fasting month. The 23rd is the official date in Indonesia, and this is the 16th, so it's coming up. And so what's happening on the Mudik front? Well, the government has decided to allow public transportation. First, they banned public transportation, or they shut it down, in order to discourage Mudik, people going on Mudik. And you remember, if you've seen any of my previous videos, Mudik is the exodus, when people leave wherever they're living to go home, go back to their home village at the end of Ramadan to celebrate Idul or Lebaran with their families. And this past week, on Wednesday, the transportation minister, Pak Budi, said that it was possible for the government to allow all means of public transport to start operations on Thursday to accommodate particular individuals while still keeping the ban on Mudik. And so what happened? Take a look at this. Of course, airlines are opened up, and what do we have? A massive mess. And I'm going to talk about some responses, some political responses to that in just a minute. And so what was opened up? Boats, planes, trains, basically, and trucks, and any moving vehicle. But according to this, according to the ministerial regulation, there are only going to be certain people allowed to do this. And so this is operational vehicles for special missions, government officials, the military, the Indonesian police, and business people with essential urgencies, and another group, and this is the loophole, another group of special people with special urgencies are people that need to go home, maybe for a medical emergency, something's happening to their family, and so, but not for Mudik, so they can go home. So I could theoretically apply, say my old grandma is sick, I need to go home, and I get a letter because you need documentation. This is Indonesia, they love documents, and I'd be cleared to travel. Now, maybe also, I'm at home to see grandma, oh well, Mudik happened at the same time. So, Pak Budi said, officials have the right to travel. Our ministerial colleagues in Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Papua, and Sumatra are allowed to travel if they have to do it for their jobs, but not for Mudik. He said, continued, I myself cannot go to Palembang in South Sumatra for Mudik, but I can go to Palembang to check the LRT there. And maybe he has to do that right at the same time as the end of Ramadan. And additionally, he said, people with special needs, such as those who have sick parents or whose children will get married, will be allowed to travel. And there's also 10,000 seasonal workers in Jakarta to whom we can give recommendation letters for traveling. So, they're seasonal workers. We have seasonal workers here too. they're going to go home. Isn't that like Moodik? And then take a look at this photo again. I've been in Moodik, I've done Moodik in the past. It looks like a Moodik group to me. And several members of the House of Representatives have asked the government to reevaluate the new travel relaxation policy after they've seen these photos of people crowding in at the airport in Jakarta, at the Soekarno-Hatta International Airport. And these lawmakers said that the government should actively inform the public about the policy so they can understand it properly. That it is supposed to prevent people from going to Moodik and curb the COVID-19, and that they can only travel for special circumstances. And so, where are we? The company in charge of the Indonesian airports said, oh, it was just a problem that only lasted a short time, a few hours, because we weren't prepared for all of these people that suddenly showed up, because we had a bunch of planes that came in at one time, and a rush of people came in, because you have to have a number of documents to be allowed to get onto the plane. It took time for people to scan the documents. And so one of the suggestions is that passengers should be able to submit their documents online prior to their flights, so that this crowding and long queues don't happen. This is in my opinion, not a good policy. You ban Moodik and then you close down the transportation and you open it up again right at the time Moodik's going to happen. What do you think is going to happen? Okay, next. Java, it's on alert. It's death spike. It's on red alert in Java now. People are calling for heightened containment efforts in Java and imposing large-scale social restrictions, known here as PSBB, because of the increased number of COVID-19 cases. Java is the epicenter of the coronavirus cases, and it has, let's see, 69% of the country's total number of cases, 81% of the total fatalities. The PSBB measures have been undertaken in a few places, Jakarta and West Java, not in other parts of Java, and those need to happen, and they need to happen soon. These next few weeks, next 3 weeks in Indonesia are critical to the fight against coronavirus here, with the push for Moodik, and then the 2-week period after that while we wait to see if we're going to get a spike in cases, and hopefully we'll have more testing being done at that time. And so that's what's going on in Indonesia. What about Bali? Well, I'm going to talk about Bali in the regular COVID-19 Bali update that I do on the No Name channel that I have over here. But just a little foreshadowing. There has been talk now about Indonesia opening up. The president and other political players are looking at what they're going to do in terms of opening Indonesia back up again, getting the economy rolling just like every place in the world. And Bali is one of the 5 places that was mentioned the other day, and I'll report about that in the next day or two. This isn't now. This is maybe in October, and I'll have more on that then. So Bali, what about Bali before I go on? Bali, the number of cases in Bali, 343, 232 positive, 4 deaths, and 107 active cases. And the villages in Bali that had been quarantined, all of them are open with the exception of one still. And things are going on like normal here, and I'll talk more about that in the Bali COVID-19 update. So let's take a look at what's happening in other parts of Asia. Online schooling. And so what's going on with online schooling around Asia? Well, Vietnam, kids went back to school this week. Kids had been out of school for since late January, and most of the children returned to school this week. There are 22 million school-age children in Vietnam, and they came back with the exception of some primary school students and kindergarten pupils who will come back a week later. It's been over 2 weeks since the country reported the domestically transmitted infection, and they decided it was time to open up the school. But they're going to continue to keep their guard up. Social distancing will be enforced in schools, as well as masks. Children have to wear masks. They have to get their temperature taken when they get to school. Social distancing of 1.5 meters is going to be enforced at all times. And one teacher said, with the little guys, it's going to be really hard to do this because they get so excited, especially when they get outside. But we're going to try our best because that's what parents expect. So, good to hear that some kids are going back to school in safe conditions, not being rushed. You don't want to push kids into a situation for political purposes. Not that I'm saying that anybody in any large country, a president, is pushing kids to go back and putting them in a bad situation for his own political, narcissistic purposes. South Korea was going to start school this week, but as I'll talk about in a minute, big spike in cases, really unfortunate, after it looked like they had everything completely under control. And so school has been delayed for another week. Reports from teachers, generally happy. Okay, some teachers, we love our students. We love being in the classroom with them, but it's also nice to get a break. And so some teachers that I talked to said, well, yeah, I really miss my students, but it's kind of nice working at home. Well, they actually go into this classroom to film their online lessons, but it's a much different situation. So, Korea will be going back on the 20th at this point. And I was talking to a Japanese teacher last night who I know, and she said that she's going back to school, and she said the same thing. I've kind of gotten used to being at home. It's pretty nice. I get to spend time with my kids more than normal, and, well, I've gotten a little lazy, she said. They have not been doing online schooling in Japan. I've mentioned this before, and so the kids they've been getting lessons, but not online schooling. They've been getting lessons and doing them at home, but it's not an online situation. And in Indonesia, kids are still doing online schooling. Okay, I'd like it to end so that my granddaughter could come back home and live with me. I miss the little thing. But according to a recent report from my daughter, like this morning, as always, teacher doesn't know when things are going to go back to normal. And with school vacation coming up next month, my guess is that they'll continue online schooling until the vacation, which stretches into July, and maybe then kids will go back to school, depending on how the situation develops in Indonesia. And so, what do we got? The Korean spike. Right, the Korean spike. So, in Korea, it seemed like everything was under control. And then, last week, what happened? A guy who was positive, a young guy who was positive, went in because the government was relaxing restrictions on people. And so bars and nightclubs were open. The young guy goes into a bar, he's positive, and boom, it just spreads. And so this is what can happen when you open things up. They've got to be opened up eventually, but this is one of the consequences of opening things up. And so he went in, and infections have been popping up. I think there was 115 the other day, let's see, according to an article in the Korea Times, following 45 days of stricter social distancing, South Korea switched to an everyday life quarantine scheme on May 6th, and this is what happened. A nightclub in Itaewon, and they have thousands of people that they're trying to track down. Korea is very good with social tracing. It's one of the reasons that they've been a model for how to take care of the situation with the coronavirus. And so they have been massive testing. In 2 days they did 24,000 tests of anybody that was suspected of being in the area. And because this club was a gay club, and there are some problems, homophobia is still alive and well in South Korea, like it is in many other places in the world. And so a lot of people that were in the bars and nightclubs at this time period were hesitant to come in to get tested, and so the government offered anonymous testing, and boom, they got a bunch of people that came in and got tested. And so we're hoping that this cluster can be taken care of quickly there, but it has made everybody aware of what happened. And I was talking to a friend of mine in Seoul last night, and she said, my phone's been ringing all day. They get notifications. Somebody in your area has tested positive for coronavirus, so they beware. So they're very on top of things. Here, it's kind of a guess. Oh, you have some coronavirus cases in your regency. Well, in our case, our regency is huge. It could be way over to the west. It could be down a little south. It could be over to the east. We don't know. In Korea, they tell you you've got a case in your neighborhood, so you need to take extra precautions. And let's end up with Singapore. Now, Singapore was another place that it looked really good for a while, and then what happened, I talked about this before, the spike came mostly from workers, overseas workers, Southeast Asians, who work in the building trades, especially, and they're packed in the dormitory, sometimes 10, 15 to a room. Here's a dormitory, and they weren't tested when everybody else in Singapore was being tested, and I've mentioned this. And so the total count, 26,891. So a friend of mine in Singapore told me, I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned. I don't want to get this because his mother lives with him. She's in my age range, so he's afraid of infecting his mother if he gets it. And so Singapore is, and I mentioned last week that or on the, yeah, I guess it was last week, the kind of extreme measures that Singapore is very strict, and they've got tough measures. And so they're continuing with those for people that don't wear masks, that don't follow social distance. But they have Singaporeans, PRs, as permanent residents, and pass holders, cases decreased from 8 to 2. And so that's good news. The dormitory cases still high. 791 migrant workers living in the dormitories were affected. New cases. This is from the Straits Times online news source. And so, yeah, that's not good for Singapore. Hopefully they'll get this under control quickly. And like a lot of other news sources in Asia, they like to mention the situation in the United States. And the article ended with, the United States remains the country worst hit with more than 1.4 million cases, 86,000 deaths as of yesterday. And so that's it. I'm going to wrap this up. Follow the regulations, the rules, the regulations, the policies, the procedures in your area. If you're supposed to stay home, wear a mask. Keep your social distance. Stay safe. Be kind to someone.